This is the story of Rocky Mancini's grandparents and their early life in America, told through his eyes. Where did your grandparents originate?
Well, originally they came from Palermo, Sicily.
And they met there. They knew each other?
They didn't know each other, oddly enough, growing up. They met on the boat coming to America.
Oh, when they immigrated. And
when they immigrated.
And when was that?
That was in 1920. They met on the boat. My grandfather was swabbing the deck on the trip over to New York City, and my grandmother was walking by, passing out tomatoes. And my grandfather loves tomatoes, and I tell you, the shine on that tomato must have been as bright as the shine on my grandmother's face, because from what I understand, he fell in love with her immediately. After they landed, they got the usual medical exams that they gave everyone, and they stamped everybody's hand with a stamp that said to T.O. New York, because they landed in Ellis Island. So they stamped all the Italian people's names with the stamp to New York, to NY. And that's why most Italian men are named Tony now. It's quite an amazing historical fact. Look it up.
So what did your grandmother do in America?
My grandmother was a seamstress. My grandmother made dresses, suits. She learned this in growing up in Sicily, and she brought that talent here to America. She made wedding dresses. She was a seamstress. She did all that type of work, and that type of work was highly respected back then. So they got married in 1922 and ended up having 2 children, a boy and a girl, my father and my aunt.
I imagine your grandmother must have known some really good recipes living in Italy.
My grandmother, aside from being a fine seamstress, was also an extraordinary cook, which you had to be in growing up in Sicily. You had to cook. Homemade cooking was the thing. You didn't have packaged foods. Everything was made from scratch. So yeah, she was a fine cook. She made great dishes like eggplant parmesan, which became Americanized, and things like chicken cacciatore, roasted peppers, the whole slew of your Italian-American food fare. And she was a great cook. My favorite dishes to make are things like eggplant parmesan, which Grandma taught me how to do. Things like roasted peppers. It's a great joy. It's a great pleasure to work with food. My grandfather also had a dream of being a musician. He used to steal all of my grandmother's utensils and turn them into musical instruments. Things like wooden spoons. Yeah, he made a musical instrument out of them, so he could serenade her after dinner. But she wasn't too thrilled because she had to go out and buy more spoons, wine jugs. And my grandfather would go out on the street. He'd take his bones, his spoons, and his jugs, and get his buddies, Tony and Tony and Tony, and they'd sit around the street and they'd play jug music. Ribs was a big influence for my grandfather's musical career. Ribs from cows. So my grandmother would make big beef rib stews. After my grandmother would make this beef stew, he would take the ribs, clean them, and dry them, and turn them into what is now today known as rhythm sticks. And I can show you a little bit playing of that if you like. And you would play a rhythm with it. Play with the Sicilian music. Okay, next question.
So, coming to this brand new land, what were some of their dreams and hopes starting a new life?
Dreams for my grandmother were, I think, quite admirable. She wanted to be a mother, raise a family, be a housewife. And it's a great pleasure to take the dreams of my grandfather and also be able to play musical instruments. So I'm sort of living in reality, the dreams that they had but did not fully accomplish.